Welcome to Sleep for Stories. Thank you for joining us on this relaxing and mysterious journey. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future tales. Wishing you a peaceful listening experience and a restful sleep. A group of friends, eager to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, decided to spend their summer vacation in a remote village, far from the distractions of their usual lives. The village was small, old, and abandoned by most of the world, with only a few residents scattered across the area. But there was something off about it, something unsettling. Our main character, Emir, and his four close friends, Zeynep, Murat, Aylan, and Ozan, arrived with high hopes of a relaxing getaway. The old wooden cottages they had rented had a quaint charm, nestled at the edge of a vast forest that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. It was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick with the scent of pine and moss. But there was thick with the scent of pine and moss was an uneasiness that lingered, creeping into their minds as the sun began to set. "This place feels strange," Aylan said, looking around the village. Her voice had a hint of concern, like it stuck in time. The others chuckled it nervously. They had come here for peace and adventure, but the eerie atmosphere was hard to ignore. The village seemed abandoned, with most of the buildings left to decay. There was an odd, almost supernatural quiet that weighed heavily on their senses, but what really struck them was the forest. It was vast and dark, stretching out into the distance. It seemed to have no end. The trees were ancient, twisted, and gnarled. There was a hidden feeling of something else inside. Something beyond the natural. As night fell, the group gathered in the living room of the cottage. The only light came from a few flickering candles, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Zeynep poured the wine, trying to break the tension, but even the alcohol couldn't dispel the unease that clung to the room. "I'm just saying, we should have gone somewhere else," Ozan said, his voice tense. "This place is wrong. I don't know how else to explain it." "Calm," the group spoke up. "We're just being paranoid. It's a small village, sure, but there's nothing here to be afraid of." But as he spoke those words, the air around them grew colder. The flames of the candles flickered as a gust of wind rushed through the room, even though all the windows were closed. A loud, echoing knock on the door broke the silence. Everyone froze. Zeynep and Aylan exchanged nervous glances. But it was Murat who stood up to check. He opened the door, slowly. But there was no one outside, only the thick darkness of the forest surrounding the cottage. "No one. It's just the wind playing tricks on us," Murat said, but his voice betrayed him. His hands were shaking. But then, as the door creaked shut, something strange happened. The world outside seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly. But then, the colors in the room began to blur, and the air seemed to hum with an unseen energy. The atmosphere felt heavier, as though the ground beneath them had somehow changed. "This is not right," Emir muttered, staring at the door. "Different?" Zeynep, now visibly shaken, turned to face the others. "Something's wrong with this place. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like we're not in the same reality anymore." Suddenly, a bright light flashed through the fair windows, illuminating the entire room in a brilliant, almost blinding glow. Everyone jumped back, hearts racing. The glow flickered and then vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving them in an eerie silence. "What the hell was that?" Ozan whispered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Zeynep said. But I think we've crossed into something else. I think we're not in the same place anymore. This isn't our world. Emir stepped forward, looking at the others. What are you saying, Zainab? Zainab's eyes were wide with fear. I'm saying, this is not the same village we arrived in. We've shifted somehow. We're in a parallel reality. The air, the colors, the energy around us, none of it feels right. The group looked at each other. Trying to make sense of her words. But they couldn't deny the strange, unsettling feeling that had taken over them. They were no longer in their world, and they knew it. I think we should leave, Murat said, his voice urgent. We need to find our way back. We need to leave this place. But when they tried to leave the cottage, the world outside wasn't the same either. The forest, which had once seemed endless, now appeared to be alive, twisting and turning as if it were watching them. The village was unchanged, but it felt like it had shifted, just like the air around them. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The trees groaned as though in pain, and a deep rumbling sound echoed through the air. Run! Emir shouted, but they were too late. A dark figure appeared in the doorway, tall and shadowy, its form flickering like a mirage. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You cannot escape, the figure's voice echoed, cold and distant. You belong here, in this reality. The curse has chosen you. You cannot leave. The group stood frozen in fear, the weight of the words settling in their minds. They had entered a reality not their own, and now they're entered a reality not their own. Darkness wanted them to stay. The question was, why? The tension in the air was palpable as they tried to understand what had just happened. Was this really a parallel world, or had they slipped into something darker, something more dangerous? As they ventured deeper into this new world, they would learn that the curse that had brought them here was not just a supernatural force, it was a living, breathing entity, feeding on their fear, their confusion, and the longer they stayed in this twisted reality, the more they would discover about its true nature. But could they find a way out, or would they be consumed by the very darkness they sought to escape? The tension in the air thickened as the dark figure in the doorway loomed over them, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The whispers of the cursed reality seemed to seep into their minds, making it impossible to think clearly. The coldness of the air wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket. You cannot escape, the figure's voice echoed again, more menacing this time. You've crossed into my domain, and now you belong to me. The group stood paralyzed. The fear stood paralyzed, the fear gripping them tightly. They had come to this village seeking rest, but instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare, from which there seemed to be no escape. Zainab was the first to break the silence, her voice shaking, but determined. What do you want from us? She demanded, though her knees felt weak under the figure's oppressive gaze. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The shadows seemed to cling to it, and the air grew colder, still, as it moved. The room around them seemed to shift, the walls warping and bending in impossible ways. The cottage they had been in moments ago was no longer recognizable. It was as though they were no longer in the same space, but somewhere far darker. You will never leave, the figure said at last, its voice now almost a growl. This place feeds on your fear, your confusion. The more you resist, the more you will become part of it. Emir tried to step forward. His fist clenched. We'll fight. We won't be your prisoners. The figure's laugh was hollow, echoing in their ears. You think you can fight me? The curse is eternal. It was never meant to be defeated. A heavy, oppressive force seemed to bear down on them as the figure moved closer, its face obscured by shadows. The ground beneath their feet rumbled again, and the walls seemed to close in, distorting and shifting in a grotesque manner. Suddenly, the air was filled with a loud, deafening crash, a surge of dark energy that rattled the very foundation of the world around them. Then, just as quickly, everything fell still. Bithi, everything fell still. Figure was gone. What the hell just happened? Ozen asked, breathless, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. Emir glanced around, trying to steady his breathing. We're still here, but where is here exactly? Where is here exactly? The cottage around them seemed unchanged at first glance, but there was something undeniably wrong. The atmosphere was thick with an unsettling quiet, the oppressive feeling of being watched still lingering. They had passed through some kind of fog barrier, some sort of threshold into this new, twisted reality. But it didn't feel like a parallel world anymore. It felt like a place where time and space no longer made sense. Look, Island said, her voice trembling as she pointed toward the window. Everything outside. It's wrong. They all turned to look out the window, and their hearts sank as they saw what lay beyond. The village they had arrived in was now completely different. The buildings, which had once seemed abandoned, were now alive with a twisted energy. The trees, previously gnarled and distant, were now towering, their branches stretching out like skeletal hands, clawing at the sky, and in the distance, they could see shapes moving in the fog, shadowy figures lurking just beyond the edge of the village. We need to get out of here, Zeynep said urgently, her voice rising with panic. We need to find a way to break this curse. But as she turned to head toward the door, she stopped. Suddenly her face paling. It's gone. The door that had once been open was now sealed shut. There was no handle, no way to open it. The door, it's locked, she said, her voice trembling with fear. Emir turned to the others, his face set with resolve. It's not just the door. We're trapped in this place. The curse doesn't let us leave. Murat stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. Maybe it's not just about leaving? Maybe it's about understanding what's really happening here. This world, it's not like our own. It bends. It shifts. Maybe we have to find the source. The group stood in silence for a moment, each of them grappling with the weight of Murat's words. They were no longer just victims of the curse, they were part of it now. They had crossed into a world that was unlike anything they had ever known. The rules of reality no longer applied here, and they had to understand how to navigate this twisted, dark place. We need to find the heart of this world, Emir said finally, his voice steady. There has to be something, some way to stop this. If we destroy the source, maybe the curse will end. Zeynep nodded. But where do we start? How do we even find it? Before anyone could answer, the floor beneath their feet began to tremble again. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. The temperature dropped, and the group could see their breath in the cold air. The whispering voices began again, soft at first, like a distant hum, but growing louder with each passing second. You cannot escape. You belong here. You cannot leave. The shadows in the corners of the room began to twist and writhe, taking honors of the room, began to twist and writhe, shapes and forms that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Figures appeared out of the dark, their faces obscured by the shadows. The whispers grew into loud, haunting voices, their words incoherent and maddening. Then, one of the figures stepped forward, its face now visible. It was a man, his features gaunt and twisted, his eyes hollow, as if they had been drained of all life. You have entered my domain, the figure said, his voice like a cold breeze. And you will never leave. You have been chosen to remain here, to serve the curse forever. Emir stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. We don't serve you. We're leaving, the figure smiled, a cruel, twisted grin that sent chills down their spines. You cannot leave. You belong to this place. The curse has claimed you. Suddenly, the room began to twist and shift again, the walls warping and bending as if they were alive. The door to the cottage disappeared entirely, leaving them trapped in an endless void. The curse had already claimed them, and there was no escape. The darkness of the parallel reality presses in around them, and as the group faces the full force of the curse, they must find a way to break free if they can. Will they unravel the mystery of this twisted world, or will they become trapped forever? The air was thick with dread, and the atmosphere in the cottage was now suffocating, pressing down on them with a weight that made it hard to breathe. The figures in the darkness, their twisted forms flickering in and out of reality, moved closer, each step bringing with it a deeper sense of terror. Amir's pulse quickened. They had already crossed into a world that bent and shifted with a mind of its own. But now, the very fabric of the space around them seemed to warp. The walls rippled like water, and the floor beneath their feet felt unsteady, as though they were standing on a foundation that wasn't quite real. "What is this place?" Murat whispered, his voice barely audible, but full of desperation. "How is any of this even possible?" Emir clenched his fists. "I don't know, but we're not going to sit here and wait for it to swallow us whole. We have to find a way to stop this, or we'll be trapped here forever." Zeynep stepped forward, her face pale, but her voice was steady. "But where do we even start? The source of this curse has to be hidden somewhere in this world, but how do we find it?" The man with the hollow eyes, the one who had spoken earlier, smiled as he stepped forward, the shadows still clinging to his form. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step bringing a sense of unease. The others backed away instinctively, but their retreat was futile. The figure was everywhere, in the shadows, in the corners, lurking in their peripheral vision. "You cannot escape the curse," the figure said again, his voice like a low growl, reverberating in their minds. "It is within you. You belong to this world now. You have no place in the world you came from." The group froze, the weight of his words sinking in. What did he mean? Was this curse tied to them personally? Had they been chosen? Was there no going back? Island, who had been silent up until this point, suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. "But what if we don't want to stay here? What if we want to go back to our world?" The figure's smile twisted further. "You are not the ones who choose. The curse has already claimed you. All you can do is serve it, or face the consequences of defying it." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The walls of the cottage twisted and groaned, the very structure of the house seeming to come alive. The windows cracked, sending shards of glass tumbling to the floor. But the air outside was no longer the same. It was as if the world beyond was bleeding into their reality, distorted, cracked, and changing. "There has to be a way," Zeynep said, her voice a mix of defiance and fear. "We can't just accept this. We need to find the source. We have to find the heart of the curse. The man let out of the curse." A low chuckle, his eyes glowing even brighter now, the pupils black as coal. "You want to find the heart? It's not as easy as you think. The curse has many layers. It feeds on your fear, your confusion. It will twist your every thought, manipulate your every step." The group was silent, absorbing the weight of his words. The realization hit them hard. This wasn't just a curse. This was something alive, something intelligent. It was no longer just a force they had stumbled upon. It was their reality now. They were trapped in its world, and the only way out was to confront it head on. The only way out was to confront it head on. "Don't have time to waste," Emir said, his voice steady, though his heart raced with anxiety. "If we stay here, we'll lose our minds. We need to understand this curse, how it works. Where is the source? How do we break free? The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it turned toward the wall of the cottage, and with a sharp motion, the wall seemed to melt, revealing a dark, swirling vortex beyond. It wasn't a door, it was a portal, a rift that seemed to lead up into an even darker, more twisted version of the world they had just entered. You think you can find it? The figure asked, its voice dripping with amusement. Very well. If you wish to seek the heart, it is through that portal. But beware, what lies within is more than you can imagine. It will test you in ways you cannot understand. The group hesitated, the portal a swirling mass of black and violet energy, drawing them in with a magnetic force. Aileen stepped forward first, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What do we do now? How do we fight this? Emir glanced around at his friends, their faces a mix of terror and resolve. They had come this far, and now there was no turning back. They had to face whatever lay ahead. We go through, he said, his voice firm. Together, without another word, they stepped forward, one by one, into the swirling portal. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world around them twisted, and the air became thick with an unnatural pressure. It felt as though they were no longer moving through space, but through time itself. The ground beneath their feet shifted and flickered like a distorted reflection. They were no longer in the cottage, but in a world that defied all logic. The landscape around them was like a dream, a nightmare. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the trees were twisted, their bark blackened and covered in strange markings. The air smelled of sulfur and decay, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with a life of its own. A distant sound reached their ears, like the cries of lost souls, echoing from every direction. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from, but the deeper they ventured into this new world, the louder it grew. It was as though they were walking through a graveyard of forgotten memories, each step leading them deeper into the unknown. We need to find the heart of this place, Emir said, his voice sharp with urgency. This is where the curse comes from. We have to destroy it. But as they walked forward, the ground beneath them seemed to warp, the shadows shifting and swirling like living creatures. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing in with their minds. You cannot escape, the voices hissed. The curse belongs to you. You are part of it. The group's pace quickened, but the darkness seemed to chase them, always just out of sight but never far enough away. The deeper they went, the more distorted the world around them became. Trees morphed into twisted figures, their limbs stretching unnaturally, their faces contorted in agony. The ground seemed to open up beneath their feet, swallowing the light and leaving them in total darkness. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a large stone altar, covered in ancient symbols and runes that pulsed with an eerie glow. The air around it crackled with dark energy, and fear around it crackled with dark energy. Temperature dropped sharply. This is it, Zeynep whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. This is where it all started. The altar seemed to hum with power, and as they approached, the figure from before appeared once more, standing at the foot of the altar. His eyes gleamed with malevolent satisfaction. You found it, he said, his voice thick with amusement. But now, you must face the truth. You cannot break the curse. It is your destiny. Emir stepped forward. It is your destiny, his fists clenched. We're not afraid of you anymore. We will break this. The figure laughed, his form flickering in and out of existence. We'll see. The group now stands at the heart of the curse. facing the altar that holds the key to their fate. Will they find a way to destroy the source, or will they be consumed by the darkness forever? The air in the clearing was thick with an unnatural cold, the shadows around them pressing in like unseen hands, pushing them toward the altar. The ancient stone altar seemed to hum with energy, its surface covered in glowing runes that pulsed, like a heartbeat. Each step the group took toward it felt heavier, as though they were walking deeper into the abyss, and yet there was no turning back. The figure, still flickering in and out of existence, stood between them and the altar, its eyes glowing brighter now, almost blinding in their intensity. The closer they got, the stronger the pull of the darkness became. It wrapped around them, suffocating them, pushing against their minds, trying to drown out their thoughts. "You don't understand," the figure said, its voice echoing in the void, the words seeping into their minds like poison. "This curse is not something you can destroy. It is part of you. It has always been part of you. You were chosen." Emir stepped forward, his jaw clenched, trying to ignore the overwhelming weight of the words. "You're wrong," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We're not your pawns. We won't be your slaves. This ends now." The figure's laughter echoed in their ears, hollow and cold. "You cannot fight fate. You were brought here for a reason. You are mine." The ground beneath them shook violently, the altar vibrating as if alive. The runes on its surface began to glow even brighter, casting an eerie, otherworldly light across the clearing. The dark energy intensified, wrapping around them, trying to tear their minds apart. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You belong here. You cannot leave. The curse is your destiny." Rachel, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice trembling with fear but filled with resolve. "We can break it. We have to break it. We're stronger than this." Her words seemed to send a ripple through the air, momentarily silencing the whispers. But the figure wasn't done yet. With a swift motion, it raised its hand, and the shadows around them surged forward, grabbing at their limbs, pulling them now toward the altar. They struggled against the dark force, but it was too strong, too relentless. "Fight it," Emir shouted, struggling to break free from the grip of the shadows. But it was no use. The darkness was all-encompassing, pulling them closer to the altar, drawing them into its grip. The figure's form began to solidify, becoming more corporeal with each passing second, its twisted smile widening as it fed on their fear. "You were never meant to leave," the figure said, its voice now a low growl. "You are mine." Emir's heart pounded in his chest as he reached for Zainab's heart-powered forward brace. Hand, pulling her closer. "We can't let it win. We will escape this." Zainab's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them, now something fierce. "We're not alone in this," she said, her voice shaking. "We have each other. We can do this." As the darkness continued to pull them in, the group formed a circle, holding each other tightly, their fingers intertwined. The figure loomed before them, its presence so overpowering that it felt like the very air was waves, pressing against them, crushing them. The altar's glow intensified, casting everything around them in a sickly light. But they didn't let go. "I won't give in," Emir whispered, his voice barely audible, but filled with determination. "Break this." Together, in that moment, something shifted. The power of their unity surged, and the darkness faltered for a brief second. The figure's grin faltered, its form flickering in and out, its grip loosening on them. The altar's glow dimmed, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, without warning, a bright flash of light erupted from the center of the circle. The figure screamed in agony as the light consumed everything around it, dissolving the shadows, the rooms, and the very fabric of the dark reality they had been trapped in. The air buzzed with energy as the light grew brighter, pushing back the curse, forcing it to retreat. The ground shook violently beneath them, but they held on. They're sealing here now, or you'll ring it a daisy. Hands locked together. The light grew brighter, stronger, until the figure screamed one final time, its form vanishing into the air. And then, silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The air became clear again. And the dark figure was gone. The altar that had once hummed with dark energy was now nothing but a stone slab. Its runes faded and lifeless. The forest around them, which had once seemed alive with dark energy, was now still. The twisted trees and the fog receding into the distance, they were free. For a moment, the group stood there, breathless, overwhelmed by what had just happened. The realization hit them all at once. They had broken the curse. They had escaped the darkness that had bound them. But, even as the relief washed over them, there was a lingering question in the back of their minds. Was it truly over? Had they truly defeated the curse? Or had they only bought themselves a fleeting moment of peace? Zeynep broke the silence. Is it over? Emir, his eyes scanning the now peaceful surroundings, nodded slowly. I think so. I think we've finally broken free. Murat stepped forward, looking at the others. But how do we know for sure? What if the curse is still out there, waiting? I don't think we'll ever know for sure, Emir said, his voice steady. But we made it out together. Zeynep smiled faintly. Yeah, we did. They looked at each other, the bond between them stronger than ever. They had survived that ever impossible, fought back the darkness, and emerged victorious. They were free, but deep inside, a part of them knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be challenges ahead, but for now, they had won, and that was enough. The group had fought and won against the curse, but their victory came with its own set of questions. The future remained uncertain, but they would face whatever came next, united in their strength and their resolve. The group stood in for my 212. The group stood in silence of the clearing, their breaths ragged, their bodies still trembling from the intensity of the battle. The dark force that had gripped them, the malevolent entity that had almost consumed them, was gone for now. But as they looked around at the now peaceful, quiet forest, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We really did it, didn't we? Aylin's voice was quiet, but there was a sense of awe in it. The weight of the victory was sinking in, but it still felt unreal. Emir turned to face her, his gaze steady. I think we did, but something doesn't feel right. We've broken the right curse, but I can't shake this feeling that it's not over yet. The forest around them had quieted. The heavy fog that had once blanketed the trees had lifted, and the twisted, gnarled branches of the trees no longer reached out like skeletal hands. The eerie energy that had suffocated them was gone, but there was still something strange in the air, an unnatural stillness that made every footstep sound louder than it showed. Murat frowned, his eyes scanning the surroundings. You're not the only one who feels that way. It's like we're still being watched. But by what? Zeynep shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. I don't know. I feel like we've broken free, but there's this pull, like we're not meant to leave this place. As they stood in the clearing, unsure of where to go next, a fainting light appeared in the distance, flickering like a lantern in the fog at first. They thought it was just a trick of the light, some residual effect of the curse still lingering, but the more they looked, the more real it seemed. Do you see that? Aylin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, said Emir, narrowing his eyes. It's coming toward us. The light seemed to float just above the ground, moving as if drawn by some invisible force. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, and as they watched, it grew brighter, closer. The group instinctively stepped back, fear rising in their chests again. The forest had been still, but now it felt alive, the air thick with an energy they couldn't explain then. The light stopped, hovering just a few feet in front of them. It wasn't a lantern after all. It was a floating orb of light, shifting in color from white to blue, then to violet, pulsating with an eerie energy. The orb hovered in place, then slowly, neerstad, amid benaidial, peristray arthurmendi. The orb hovered in place, then slowly, almost reluctantly, began to dissolve. A figure began to emerge from the light. The figure was tall, draped in a flowing cloak that shimmered like the stars. The face was obscured, but the presence was undeniably powerful, filled with an overwhelming sense of ancient authority. Who are you? Emir called out, stepping forward, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. The figure slowly lifted its hand, and the shadows around them seemed to bend and twist in response. I am a keeper, the figure's voice rang out, clear and resonant. I have watched over this world for centuries. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing to make sense of this new figure. Who were they? Were they another entity sent by the curse? Or something else entirely? A keeper? Zainab asked, her voice tight. What does that mean? The figure's gaze shifted to her, though its face remained hidden. I have seen the flow of time, and I have witnessed the rise and fall of many worlds. Your actions have affected the balance of this world, this reality, and now the consequences must be dealt with. Murat took a step back. Consequences? What do you mean? The keeper's voice was like thunder now, a deep resonance that shook the ground beneath their feet. You have broken the curse, but the damage done cannot be undone. You have broken through the fabric of reality itself, and now you are bound to this world. You cannot leave until you have fixed what has been broken. The group fell silent, confusion and fear written on their faces. Bound to this world, they had fought to escape it, and now they were trapped once again? Emir took a step forward, his eyes fierce. You said we broke through the fabric of reality. What exactly does that mean? Why are we still here? The keeper's form shifted slightly, the light around them flickering. This world, this realm is not simply a place. It is a nexus, a point where many realities converge. Your crossing has caused a rift in the fabric that holds them together. This world cannot remain as it is. The rift must be sealed. Aylin spoke up, her voice filled with frustration. So what? We're stuck here forever? The keeper paused, as if considering her words. Not forever, but you must repair what you have broken. You must find the source of the rift and seal it. Only then can you return to your own reality. Emir turned to the group, his face pale but determined. We can do this. We've faced worse. We've survived. Zainab nodded. But how do we find this source? How do we fix something we barely understand? The keeper raised its hand once again, and in response, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and a series of glowing symbols appeared in the air, floating in front of them like a map. The path will not be easy, the keeper intoned, but the source of the rift lies in the heart of the Nexus Temple. You must journey there, confront the force that resides within, and seal the rift before it consumes everything. The symbols in the air shifted, revealing the path they needed to take. It was a dangerous, winding journey through the heart of this twisted reality, a place where the laws of physics no longer applied, where the boundaries between worlds were thin and fragile. You must hurry, the keeper warned. Every moment you waste brings this world closer to collapse. You cannot stay here long. The group exchanged looks, the weight of the task ahead of them settling in. But there was no turning back now. They had no turning back now. To find the Nexus Temple, they had to repair the rift. It was the only way home. The journey into the heart of the Nexus Temple was about to begin. But would the group be able to navigate the dangers that awaited them? Would they survive the rift that threatened not only their reality, but every reality? And what dark force awaited them within the temple? With the keeper's words still lingering in the air, the group stood silently, contemplating the dangerous journey ahead. The path to the Nexus Temple was no easy one, and the looming threat of the rift consumed their thoughts. They had been thrown into a reality they barely understood, and now they had to face it head-on. The keeper's light began to fade, its form becoming less tangible as it spoke one last time. "Do not underestimate the power of the rift," it said, its voice echoing in their minds. "It will challenge you in ways you cannot imagine. Stay together, and remember, the heart of the temple is where the rift began. Only there can you end it." The forest around them had fallen, eerily silent, the faint boom of the rift still vibrating in the air. They could feel the tension growing, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emir took a deep breath, his heart pounding with both fear and determination. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady. "We don't have much time." The group began to move, stepping into the forest once more. The path ahead was unclear, winding through the dense trees, but the strange, glowing symbols the keeper had shown them still lingered in the air, guiding their way. The path seemed to twist and turn unnaturally, like the forest itself was alive and shifting with them. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunching of leaves underfoot. The deeper they ventured, the more fell as to rigakarin in org, than artwaige. A galley nine in oil. With these sparse structures over trees underfoot, distorted the surroundings became. The trees no longer had the familiar gnarled appearance instead. They seemed to be growing and stretching in unnatural ways, their branches twisting like tendrils in search of something. The ground beneath, with their feet seemed to pulse with every step they took, as if they were walking on something alive. "This place is getting weirder by the second," Murat muttered, his voice filled with a mix of fear and frustration. "It doesn't feel like we're on Earth anymore." Island, walking beside him, nodded. "It feels wrong. The air, the ground, even the light, everything is different." Emir's gaze remained focused on the path ahead. "We have to keep moving. The rift is getting closer. We need to find the temple and close it." After what felt like hours, the group arrived at a clearing where the forest opened up to reveal an ancient stone structure. The stone was dark, almost obsidian in color, and covered in strange runes and symbols, much like the ones that had been hovering in the air earlier. The structure loomed over them, its form imposing and unnatural, as if it had been placed there by forces beyond their understanding. "This is it," Zeynep said quietly, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The Nexus Temple," Emir nodded, feeling a sense of dread settle in his stomach. The temple looked ancient, its stone surface worn by time, yet its power radiated from it like a living thing. The air around it seemed thick, charged with an energy that made it difficult to breathe. The group approached the entrance, but as they did, the ground beneath them began to shake again. The air grew colder, and the sky above darkened, swirling with clouds. The dark energy of the rift was drawing closer, and they could feel it. "We have to hurry," Emir said, his voice urgent. "The rift is going to reach its peak soon. We have to seal it before it consumes everything." As they entered the temple, the oppressive energy grew even stronger. The inside of the temple was vast, with high ceilings and walls covered in intricate carvings and glyphs. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was covered in remnants of old forgotten rituals. The center of the temple was an altar, ancient and cracked, with dark symbols etched into its surface. "That's it," Murat said, pointing to the altar. "That's the source of the rift." The moment they stepped closer to it, the ground shook closer to it. The ground shook violently, and a loud grinding noise echoed through the temple. The walls around them began to pulse, as if alive, and the dark energy they had felt earlier grew stronger. Shadows seemed to creep from every corner, swirling around the group, and then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was the same figure they had seen before, the one who had taunted them in the clearing, the one who had warned them they could never leave. Its form flickered like a shadow, its features hidden, but they could feel its malevolent presence. It was not just a figure, it was a manifestation of the curse itself. "You thought you could escape," the figure's voice echoed, hollow and mocking. "You thought you could stop me, but this is my world. You are nothing here." Emir's heart raced, but he refused to back down. "You're wrong, We're not your prisoners. We're taking this world back." The figure's laugh was cold, cruel, and it stepped forward, its form twisting, and it stepped forward, its form twisting and shifting like smoke. "You cannot defeat me. I am the curse. I am the heart of the rift. You are nothing more than pawns in a game you cannot comprehend." Zeynep stepped forward, her voice firm. "We're not pawns. We fought to get here, and we're not going to let you win now." With that, she reached into her pocket, pulling out the small, ancient artifact the keeper had given them, the one that would seal the rift. She held it high, the glow from it beginning to intensify as it waysized as hot tracked white. The ghost tree is terry, and now unstrayed but fell. Maiden, or you were little girl, reacted to the energy in the temple. The figure hesitated for the first time, its form flickering again. "No, you cannot. You don't understand what you are doing." But it was too late. As Zeynep pressed the artifact into the altar, the runes on the surface began to glow, and a powerful surge of energy filled the room. The dark energy that had been swirling around them began to dissipate, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The ground stopped shaking, and the temple itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The figure screamed in agony as the light from the artifact enveloped it, its form twisting and writhing before it disintegrated into nothingness. The rift was closing. The group stood in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. The power of the curse had been destroyed, but they knew the world they had entered was still fragile. They had sealed the rift, but the cost had been high. But for now, the darkness was gone, the temple was silent, and the air was calm. "We did it," Emir said, his voice a whisper of disbelief. Zeynep nodded, her eyes wide with both relief and exhaustion. "We really did," Ada will say. As they looked around, the temple began to fade, its walls crumbling into dust. The energy they had felt earlier began to dissipate, and the world around them shifted, slowly, like the setting of a new dawn. The once distorted reality began to realign. They had done it. They had broken the curse, closed the rift, and returned balance to their world. For now, the group, though weary and scarred from their journey, stood together. The rift had been sealed, but what they had learned was more profound than they could have ever anticipated. The curse was not just a force, it was a part of something far greater, something that would always linger in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. But they had won. For now, as the final remnants of the curse faded, the once oppressive atmosphere in the Nexus Temple shifted to a strange calm. The glowing runes on the altar flickered for a moment. Before going dark, their power spent, the air was still, but the silence felt unnatural, almost as if it was waiting for something, holding its breath. The group stood together, trying to process what had just happened. They had closed the rift, but there was still an unsettling feeling in the air, like the world itself was holding on to a secret. It wasn't just the rift that had been affected by their actions, something deeper had shifted. "We did it," Murat said softly, but there was no triumph in his voice, only exhaustion. "I can't believe we actually did it." Aylin, ever the optimist, tried to smile, but her eyes were filled with doubt. "But what happens now? The rift is closed, but the world still feels wrong." Emir turned to face them, his expression serious. "We've sealed the rift, but the darkness isn't gone. We felt it. It's still here, beneath the surface. I don't know how long it'll surface. I don't know how long it'll take. But I think we need to leave this place." But as he spoke, the very ground beneath their feet began to tremble once again. The air grew heavier, and a deep, resonating hum vibrated through the temple's walls. The structure seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, and the once quiet surroundings were now alive with unnatural sounds. The temple began to distort once more, the stone walls shifting and warping. "This isn't over," Zeynep whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Before anyone could respond, the shadows around them seemed to gather, swirling like a storm. From the center of the altar, a bright light erupted, and in an instant, the world around them began to fracture. Reality itself was unraveling. "What is happening?" Ozen shouted, his voice filled with panic. The light expanded, tearing through the air, and suddenly the world around them seemed to collapse. The temple dissolved into dust, the very fabric of reality warping and twisting into a new form. The group found themselves standing on the edge of a precipice, looking out into an infinite void. The ground beneath their feet was no longer solid, but instead, it seemed to float in a black abyss. "This place it's breaking apart," Murat said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We were supposed to stop the curse, but we've made things worse." Emir gritted his teeth. "No, we didn't cause this. The curse, whatever this is, was never meant to be stopped. We've merely delayed it before they could react." A loud, deafening roar echoed through the void. The sound was primal, raw, and filled with fury. It felt like the entire world was trembling in response. "The source," Zeynep whispered. "It's not gone. It's been watching us." Out of the darkness, a massive figure emerged, towering over them. Its form was monstrous, its body composed of shifting shadows and jagged, glowing eyes. It was like nothing they had seen before, a creature born of the curse itself, a manifestation of the very evil they had tried to escape. "This is the heart of the curse," the figure boomed, its voice shaking the very air around them. "You have delayed what was inevitable. You cannot fight what is eternal." The ground beneath their feet cracked open, and the shadows surged forward, pulling the group toward the figure. They fought against the force, but it was overwhelming. The figure's presence consumed everything, filling the void with an overwhelming darkness. "No, we're not going to be your slaves," Emir shouted, his voice hoarse. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, its form solidifying into something even more terrifying. "You think you can defy me? You are nothing. You will serve the curse, just as all others before you." Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the void. It was the same light from before the energy they had used to close the rift, now pulsing with the rift, now pulsing with even more intensity. The group, knowing this was their only chance, reached out toward the light. "Focus!" Zeynep shouted, her voice filled with determination. "We can do this! Together!" They joined hands, their combined energy reaching toward the light as the shadows closed in around them. The figure shrieked in rage, but it couldn't stop them. The light enveloped them, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. Then, everything erupted into a massive explosion of energy, ripping through the void. They woke up in the same clearing they had found themselves in before, but everything around them had changed. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive sense of darkness had lifted. The world around them was still, calm. The sky above them was clear, and the forest that once felt alive with malice now seemed peaceful. Zeynep blinked, disoriented. What happened? Where are we? Emir looked around, scanning their surroundings. The world seemed normal, but there was still something in the air, a quiet, lingering presence that reminded them they had only just survived. "I think we've done it," he said softly. "The curse is gone." Aylin, who had been silent until now, slowly nodded. "It feels different, but is it really over?" The group exchanged glances, unsure. Had they truly stopped the curse, or had they simply bought themselves a brief moment of peace? "We've broken the heart of the curse," Emir said, his voice strong. "But we can never forget what we've learned, what this world can do." As the group stood there, taking in the peaceful surroundings, they realized that the rift had been to peaceful surroundings, sealed. The curse, for now, had been contained, but they also knew that the darkness they had faced had changed them forever. They had escaped its grasp, but they would never be the same. The group walked away from the clearing, the sun setting on the horizon. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they had survived, and for now, that was enough. As the group walked away from the clearing, the distant hum of the world seemed to fade into nothingness. The sun had into nothingness begun its descent, casting a golden glow across the horizon. But there was no denying the weight that still clung to them. Even though the curse had been sealed, the experience had left an indelible mark on their minds. Emir led the way. His ear led the way, his footsteps steady but heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, waiting for them to slip up. Waiting for the moment when they'd forget the lessons learned in the heart of the rift. He didn't trust that the world was truly free of the darkness. "We did it," Zeynep said, her voice soft but filled with relief. "But I feel like it's not over, like there's still something else out there." "I feel the same," Aylin replied, glancing over her shoulder. "It's like the world is holding its breath." Murat, walking beside her, shook his head. "Maybe that's just us. Maybe the curse has messed with our minds more than we thought." But Emir wasn't convinced. The peace around them felt too perfect. There had been a shift, yes, but it wasn't just the curse that had changed. It was them. They were different now, forever marked by the things they had seen and the horrors they had faced. And he knew deep down that it wasn't just the horror, the curse that had a hold on them. "The world feels still," he said, his voice low, too still. "I can't shake the feeling that we're not completely out of danger." Zeynep glanced at him, her eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean?" "We've sealed the rift. We've stopped the curse. What else could be out there?" Emir stopped walking, turning to face her. "I don't know, but I think there's something we didn't fully understand. Something about the nature of this place. Or maybe something we didn't see. The curse was never just a force. It was part of a cycle, something that's been happening for longer than we can fathom." Nura, always the skeptic, laughed softly, but there was no humor in his voice. "You think we're just going to walk out of here and everything will go back to normal? Do you really think we're done?" "No," Emir said firmly. "We're not done. And I don't think we'll ever be done with this." The group fell silent, each of them pondering Emir's words. They had been through so much, seen horrors and faced things they could never fully comprehend. And now that they had broken the curse, they didn't know what to expect next. As the group continued walking, they found themselves on the edge of a familiar, yet distorted landscape. The village, what was once a remote, forgotten place, was now in sight. But it wasn't the same village they had left behind. It was quieter. The buildings, though standing, looked different, somehow worn, but not in the way they remembered. There was a subtle unease in the air, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. "That's not right," CNET muttered, looking at the village ahead. "This isn't the same place we were in earlier." Emir's heart skipped a beat. He was right, something was different. The air had changed. The trees that once surrounded the village were now twisted, their bark darkened and covered in strange shifting patterns. The roads seemed to have no clear direction, like they were part of some greater labyrinth. It wasn't just the village, it was the entire world. The whispers began again, faint at first, like a distant hum in the back of their minds, but growing louder. A voice, a presence. Something was following them. "We need to get out of here," Eileen whispered, a note of panic in it, her voice. "This place, it's not what we thought. We need to face it," Emir said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We're not leaving until we find out what's really happening here. There's something we missed, something we didn't." The group exchanged uncertain glances, but they knew there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they had to face whatever had been unleashed. They had already broken the curse, but the reality they now faced was something entirely different, something more insidious. As they entered the village, the buildings seemed to loom over them, casting long shadows in the fading light. The once familiar streets were now unfamiliar, twisted, as if the village itself had been altered. It was as if they had stepped into an entirely different version of their world, one that was far more dangerous, far more alive. "This isn't just about the curse anymore," Zainab said, her voice low. "It's like the very fabric of reality is breaking apart." Emir nodded. "Exactly. The rift wasn't just a hole in the world, it was something that connected everything. And we've disturbed that connection? Now, we have to find out why." Suddenly, they heard a crash from behind one of the buildings, followed by a low, guttural growl. The air shifted again, and this time, they knew it wasn't just the wind. Something was approaching, something alive, something they hadn't seen before. Before they could react, a dark, shadowy figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. It moved quickly, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a creature born of the curse, a manifestation of the twisted reality they had created. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, more figures began to materialize, their forms darker and more grotesque than anything they had faced before. Emir drew his breath sharply, turning to the group. "This is what we've been running from. This is the true nature of the curse." The creatures closed in on them, their eyes glowing with hunger. They had crossed the threshold between worlds, and now they would have to fight for their survival. The creatures closed in, their eyes glowing brighter with every step. The group was cornered, with no clear escape route. It was no longer just a fight to stop the curse, it was a battle to survive, the very reality they had altered. Would they make it out alive? Or would this cursed world consume them completely? The creatures surrounded them, their glowing eyes narrowing as they closed in. The air was thick with a heavy energy, a dark presence that threatened to overwhelm them. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, the earth itself bending and warping as the figures advanced. There was no escape, no retreat. Emir's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at his friends. They were trapped, cornered in this twisted version of the village, with no clear way out. The creatures, the manifestations of the rift were too many, too powerful. "We need to fight back," Emir said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. "We can't let them overwhelm us." Zainab, her hand shaking, but her resolve unwavering, nodded. How? They're everywhere. What can we possibly do? Nurat's eyes darted around, searching for something, anything to give them an advantage. We don't have much choice. We have to hold them off and find a way to disrupt the rift. We need to get to the center of this place. Aylin stepped forward, her fear mixing with adrenaline. The center, the altar, right? That's where we sealed the rift before. Emir's gaze turned toward the shadowy figures, who were now circling them like predators. Their grotesque forms shifted in and out of existence, flickering like shadows and smoke. The creatures snarled. Their teeth bared and dripping with something black and viscous. That's our goal, Emir said. We need to get there, fight our way through. Suddenly, one of the creatures lunged toward them with terrifying speed, its jagged teeth snapping in the air. Without thinking, Emir dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's grasp. He rolled across the ground, barely getting back to his feet, before another figure rushed him. Move, he shouted, throwing himself toward Aylin, who had pulled a small blade from her pack. We need to get to the center, now! The group fought back, each using whatever they could to defend themselves. Zainab kicked at the advancing creatures, her legs trembling with fear, but each time she pushed one back, another took its place. The creatures seemed endless, and the air around them vibrated with dark energy, making it hard to focus. Murat grabbed a large wooden branch from the ground and swung it with all his might at one of the creatures, knocking it back. They're relentless. How are we supposed to win this? We don't need to win, Emir shouted back. We need to survive long enough to reach the center. That's where the rift started. If we can destroy the source, maybe we can end this once and for all. The shadows around them seemed to swirl, and pulse. The ground beneath their feet shuddering with every movement the creatures made. The altar, the source of the rift, was not far ahead, but it felt like they were miles away. Each step forward seemed to be met with more resistance. The creatures closing in faster, their twisted forms blocking the way. We have to keep going, Zainab urged, her breath ragged. The rift won't close unless we reach the altar. The figures continued their relentless attack, each more terrifying than the last. Their glowing eyes burned with hatred, their mouths gaping open, ready to consume. But the group pressed on, fighting through the waves of darkness, determined to reach the heart of this world. Emir was the first to break through the horde, racing toward the altar. His breath was ragged, his muscles sore from the constant fighting, but he knew they had no choice. If they didn't reach the altar, they would be lost. We're almost there, he shouted, reaching the base of the altar. The stone was cold beneath his hands, and the strange symbols carved into it pulsed with an eerie light. As if aware of their presence, the altar had been the source of the rift, before it had been the source of the rift, before it had been where the curse had begun, and now it was where it would end. Zainab reached him, her face determined, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. What do we do now? How do we stop it? Emir looked around, searching for anything that could help them. The air crackled with energy as the creatures closed in once more, their twisted forms moving faster than ever. Time was running out. We have to destroy the altar, he said, his ears, voice tight with urgency. We've sealed the rift before, but this time, we need to destroy the source completely. Zainab's eyes widened as she realized what he meant. But we don't have the artifact anymore. We used it to close the rift. What? Don't need it, Emir said, his eyes narrowing. We've already broken the connection. This altar was built to hold the curse, to keep the rift open. If we destroy it, the curse will collapse. As if on cue, a massive roar erupted from the creatures behind them, their shrill screeches filling the air. The shadows grew darker, more solid, and the figures began to charge toward them. Emir grabbed Zainab's hand. "We have to do this together. We need to focus. This is the only way." Together, they pressed their palms against the altar, and in that moment, the air around them seemed to freeze. The ground beneath their feet shuddered violently, the world vibrating with a force that seemed to tear at the very fabric of ever reality. The symbols on the altar blazed with light, brighter and brighter, until it felt as though the very universe was being pulled apart. The figures screamed, their voices a haunting chorus as they were pulled into the altar's glow. The Thay light was blinding, and the pressure in the air became unbearable. The world around them began to warp, shifting and collapsing into itself. With one final push, the altar cracked, its surface shattering, as the energy contained within it exploded outward. The light consumed everything, blinding them as the very fabric of the cursed reality began to collapse. The world around them disappeared, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. No creatures, no altar, no rifters, no altar, no rifters. Just a profound, empty stillness. When the light finally faded, they found themselves back in the clearing. The air was calm, the oppressive weight of the curse gone. The village, the rift, and the creatures were gone. But as they stood in them, creatures were gone. But as they stood in the silence, they knew they had made it out. The curse was no more. The rift had been sealed, and this twisted reality had been restored. But even in that moment of victory, a small part of them couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness they had faced would never truly be gone. The rift had been sealed, but the echoes of the curse would always be there. And with that, the curse is finally broken. The journey was long, and the world they had entered would never be the same, but they'd never be the same. Survived, they made it. The clearing was eerily quiet, and the strange, ominous presence that had once filled the air was now gone. The village that had haunted them was no more, its twisted forms and the curse that had plagued them dissipating like smoke in the wind. The world around them seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. Amir, Zainab, Murat, Aylin, and Ozan stood together, their breaths heavy from the ordeal, their bodies aching, but their hearts heavy from the ordeal. Their bodies aching, but their hearts filled with a strange sense of relief. They had done it. They had broken the curse, sealed the rift, and escaped the hellish world that had trapped them. But as they stood there, staring at the peaceful landscape before them, something felt off. "Is it really over?" Aylin asked, her voice shaky. She looked around, scanning the clearing as though expecting something to jump out from the shadows. Amir took a deep breath. His eyes locked on the horizon. "I think so, but I can't shake the feeling that we've only scratched the surface of whatever this was. The curse. It was just the beginning." Zainab turned to face him, her expression full of uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "I thought we destroyed it. We sealed the rift," Amir said slowly. "But this place, the way it shifted, the way it was alive, I don't think we've seen the full extent of the power at work here." Murat stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "So, you think there is more to this? More we haven't dealt with?" Amir nodded. "I don't know, but we need to stay vigilant. We can't just assume everything's over. Not when the rift still exists, and not when this world was so easily altered." There was a long pause, as the group stood in the stillness of the clearing. The air around them felt charged, like the very ground beneath their feet was waiting for something to happen. Even though the immediate danger had passed, the reality of what they had just endured began to sink in. "How do we move forward?" Zainab asked quietly, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "What do we do now that we're free?" "We keep moving forward," Amir said firmly, turning back to face them. We faced the darkness and survived. But we can't forget what we've learned. We need to rebuild, to make sure this curse doesn't return, to make sure the rift stays done. Sitfield. Murat gave a quiet laugh, though it was filled with exhaustion. We've been through hell and back. Now, I think we deserve a break. Eileen smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. We've all lost something. This Cursidin took a lot from us, but we made it out, and that means something. As the group stood there, contemplating their next steps, the world around them remained unnervingly quiet. The wind was still, the birds weren't singing, and the trees stood. The birds weren't singing, and the trees stood motionless. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see if they had truly sealed the curse, or if something more sinister was brewing beneath the surface. "Do you hear that?" Ozan asked, his voice low and tense. The others froze, listening. A soft, almost imperceptible sound filled the air, a distant whisper, like the rustling of leaves, but different. It was darker, deeper. The group exchanged nervous glances. "Something's not right," Zeynep whispered. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble once again. The ground shifted, the trees around them creaked and groaned, and the whispers grew louder, now accompanied by low, rumbling growls from the earth itself. "What is that?" Murat asked, his voice rising with panic. Before anyone could answer, the sky above them began to darken. A thick, swirling mist began to rise from the ground, creeping in from every corner of the clearing. The air turned cold, and a heavy corner of the clearing weight seemed to settle in their chests. "Not again," Aylin muttered, her voice trembling. But it wasn't the same darkness they had encountered before. This time, it felt different, more intense, more invasive. The mist surrounded them, seeping into their lungs and into their minds, clouding their thoughts. Emir stepped forward, his voice cutting through the panic. "Stay together. Whatever this is, we have to face it head on. It's not over, not yet." As they stood firm, "Not yet." The mist thickened, and figures began to emerge from the fog, shadows twisted, grotesque shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. They were like the creatures from before, but they had changed. They were stronger, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their forms were darker, their presence more menacing. The group readied themselves for what was to come, their bodies tense and ready to fight. But they knew this was not going to be an easy battle. "We need to, Derek, find the source of this," Emir said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We need to stop it before it gets worse." The creatures advanced, their forms shifting and distorting in the mist. They were everywhere. Surrounding the group, their eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. The battle was far from over. This was only the beginning. The creatures moved closer, their forms flickering and distorting with every step. The mist thickened, wrapping around the group like a living thing, choking the air around them. Their eyes glowed brighter, their shadows twisting as if they were made of pure darkness. Emir stood tall, his heart racing, but his mind sharp. He could feel the oppressive presence closing in on them, the weight of it pressing down on his chest. This was no ordinary threat. This wasn't just the curse they had faced before, it was something far more ancient. Something they hadn't yet understood. "We have to stay together," he shouted to the others, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Stay close. We need to find the source of this. It's not just random, it's targeting us." Zeynep, her breath coming in sharp gasps, glanced at the swirling mist around them. "It's like it's alive, like it's watching us, learning from us." Murat, his fists clenched, took a step forward. "We've fought before, we can do it again." "But how do we stop this?" Emir's eyes narrowed. The creatures weren't just attacking them, they were waiting. Every movement they made seemed to push the creatures back a little, but only momentarily. The figures were relentless, and the thick fog made it nearly worthless. I say word, Wamidini, shriek choke bag, Pigal which train the warriors. Plus the thick fog made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. We need to find the heart of this, Emir said, his voice full of urgency. The source of all of this. We've destroyed the rift once, but there's something else here, something even more powerful. Before anyone could respond, a scream pierced the air. It wasn't one of the creatures, it was Aylin. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. The creature she had been facing had stepped forward, its jagged mouth opening wider than humanly possible, emitting a low, guttural growl. The air around it shimmered with a dark energy, and as it lunged at her, the mist seemed to ripple with it. Zainab reacted quickly, pulling Aylin out of the creature's path. But it wasn't enough. The air around them crackled, and the ground shook again. The figures in the mist began to converge, surrounding them, cutting off their escape. The tension in the air grew thick, suffocating them as they realized their options were running out. We need to move, Emir shouted, grabbing Aylin by the arm. Head for the center of the village. We'll make a stand there. As they pushed forward, the ground beneath them began to warp and twist once again. The trees around them were no longer trees, they were moving, their branches stretching out like arms, reaching for them. Every step they took was met with arms, reaching for them, resistance. The fog pressed in closer, suffocating their every breath. They could feel the creatures following them, stalking them through the darkness. The air was alive with whispers, the same dark voices from before. The curse had been more ambitious, from speaking tears. Whoa. The curse had been more than just a force, it was alive. It was aware, and it was evolving. Where is it? Zainab gasped, looking frantically around. Where is the source? They reached the center of the village, the old town square, which now felt like a desecrated monument to the curse. The buildings, once quaint and old, were now twisted and warped, their foundations cracked and crumbling. The sky above them was no longer the sky they knew. The stars blinked ominously, like eyes watching them from above. This is it, Emir said, his voice heavy with realization. We're at the heart of it all. The altar must be close. But as soon as he spoke, the ground beneath them cracked open, a deep rift forming in the earth. It was wide and deep, as though it led to an abyss, pulling everything toward it. We don't have time, Murat yelled, grabbing onto a nearby pillar to keep his balance as the ground began to tremble. Get to the altar! Now! Now! Emir turned and ran toward the center of the village, where an old stone structure still stood, half collapsed but unmistakable. It was the same altar they had seen earlier, only this time it was glowing with an ominous, unnatural light. The dark energy that had been consuming them was being funneled into it, feeding it, bringing it to life. This is it, Emir muttered, his voice filled with resolve. The source, the creature's shrill cries echoed from the shadows, drawing nearer. They were almost there, but time was running out. We need to destroy it, Zainab cried. If we don't, but she was cut off as a massive shadow lunged at them from the darkness. A creature, larger and more monstrous than any they had seen before, emerged from the mist. It was humanoid but twisted, its form broken and distorted, and its eyes glowed with an unholy fire. Before anyone could react, the creature swept through the group, knocking them off their feet. The ground shook violently as the figure slammed into the altar, causing a ripple of dark energy to explode outward. The sky above them cracked open, lightning flashing in every direction. The altar began to pulse with a powerful, suffocating energy. The creature roared, but it was not in pain, it was in victory. The rift was opening, and they were at the heart of it. We can't stop this, Aylin cried out, struggling to regain her footing. Emir gritted his teeth. They were so close. They couldn't let it end like this. He had come too far. They had come too far. With one final surge of energy, he reached out toward the altar. With one final surge of energy, he reached out toward the altar, his hand glowing with the remnants of the energy they had used to seal the rift. Before, the altar began to hum louder, the air vibrating with power as they tried to force the curse back. But the ground began to crack wide open again, and the rift gate opened further, swallowing the village whole. The battle was reaching its breaking point. The curse had nearly consumed everything, but the group had a final chance to stop it. Would they survive? Or would the darkness finally claim them? The air was thick with energy, the rift expanding and contracting as the altar pulsed violently. The ground beneath them continued to tremble, and the very fabric of reality seemed to shudder in response. The monstrous creature that had emerged from the darkness howled in triumph, its glowing eyes fixated on the group. "We can't let it win," Emir gritted through clenched teeth, his hand still reaching for the altar. "It's feeding off the curse, it's the source." Zeynep, still reeling from the force of the creature's attack, scrambled to her feet. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a spark of determination in them. "We can't keep fighting forever. There has to be something we can do." Murat, bloodied and bruised but still standing, gritted his teeth. "What if we destroy the altar? Tear it apart?" Emir nodded sharply, eyes fixed on the altar. "We have no choice. The curse is tied to it. If we don't destroy it, this place will swallow us all." The creature roared again, louder this time, its form shifting as it grew larger, its jagged as it grew larger, its jagged claws extending toward them. The air seemed to warp with the dark power it exuded, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to crack wider, threatening to swallow them whole without warning. The creature lunged toward them. Aylin barely had time to react, raising her hands to block the attack. But just before the creature's claws could strike, a blinding flash of light erupted from the altar. The light engulfed everything around them, pushing back the creature and sending it reeling into the distance. The group was knocked off their feet, their bodies pressed into the ground by the intensity of the blast. The world around them seemed to shift, the darkness giving way to a blinding white light. When the light faded, they were left in a stark, silent world. The rift had stopped expanding. The altar, once glowing with dark energy, was now dim and lifeless. The creature that had been chasing them was gone, its presence vanishing as the energy around them began to fade. We did it?" Zeynep gasped, her eyes scanning the clearing. There was a feeling of emptiness, but no more oppressive weight. The oppressive energy that had once filled the air was now gone, leaving only silence in its wake. Emir slowly stood up, looking around. "I think so." The ground beneath them was no longer shaking, and the oppressive air that had once suffocated them was now calm. The village, the creatures, the rift, it was as though they had never existed. The world around them felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. But as they stood there, still catching their breath, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking beneath the surface. "I don't know," Murat said, wiping the blood from his face. "I feel like we've stopped the curse, but something about this place, I don't trust it." Aylin nodded, her eyes wary. "This world, it feels like we're on borrowed time. Like it's waiting for something." Emir turned to face them, his head expression grim. "We're not free of it yet. I think this world, it's still unstable. We've closed the rift, but we've only put a bandage on a wound. The curse, the darkness, it's still out there." We may have stopped it this time, but it could come back, or worse, something new could emerge from it. Zeynep looked at the others, her face resolute. Then we fight it again. We don't stop. We don't give up. Emir smiled faintly. Exactly, we've survived this. We'll survive this, whatever comes next. But just as they thought they had time to catch their breath, the world around them began to shift once more. The ground trembled, the air began to ripple, and the sky above them darkened. The faint sound of whispers returned soft at first, like a distant hum, but growing louder and clearer by the second. It's not over. The whispers seemed to come from every direction, surrounding them. It wasn't just one voice. It was many an army of voices, each one voices filled with anger, despair, and malice. Emir's heart skipped a beat. It's coming back. And then, from the shadows, they emerged figures, creatures, and monstrous beings that seemed to be made of pure darkness. They flickered in and out of pure darkness. They flickered in and out of existence, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. There's something more, Zeynep muttered. The curse, it's not just one entity. It's a whole world, a system of corruption. As the creatures closed in, the ground beneath them began to crack open once more. The whispers grew louder, and the oppressive air thickened. The creatures' forms were shifting, changing, as though they were drawn from the very fabric of this broken reality. The group stood together, ready for the fight of their lives. They had closed the rift before, but this time, the battle was different. The world they had entered wasn't just a twisted version of their own. It was a living, breathing entity, an existence shaped by the darkness they had unknowingly unleashed. They couldn't run anymore. They couldn't hide. They had to finish what they started. They had to destroy the very source of the curse, the very essence of this twisted world, before it consumed them all. And this time, there would be no second chances. The battle had only just begun. The creatures, the rift, the curse, it was all part of something much bigger than they had imagined. Would they be able to destroy the heart of this twisted reality once and for all, or would they be swallowed by the darkness? The figures in the shadows grew closer, their twisted forms flickering in and out of reality. Their eyes glowed with a cold, unholy fire, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble with every step they took. The whispers continued to rise, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. The group stood together, their hearts pounding, but their resolve unshaken. They had already faced impossible odds, and now, with the curse threatening to consume them once more, they had no choice but to fight. We have to find the source, Emir said, his voice steady despite the growing fear. Whatever this is, it's not just a curse. It's part of something larger, something more. Zeynep, her eyes narrowed as she scanned theater, creatures closing in, nodded. We've already seen how this world bends, how it shifts and changes. If we don't find the heart of it, this will never end. The ground cracked again, and a massive roar filled the air, shaking the very earth. Beneath their feet, the creatures seemed to pause for a moment, their dark eyes fixed on the group as if waiting for the next move. Then, without warning, they lunged. The group fought back with everything they had. Mira swung a broken piece of wood at one of the creatures, its form flickering and warping as it dodged the attack with unnatural speed. Aileen kicked another one away, her legs trembling with the effort. The creatures were relentless, attacking from all directions, each more powerful than the last. But the group couldn't back down. They couldn't afford to. We need to stop them, Emir shouted. Focus! We need to destroy the source. Zeynep glanced around, trying to find a way to stop the onslaught. Where is it? Where's the heart of this twisted reality? At that moment, the ground beneath them began to shift violently. The village around them was starting to collapse into itself. the buildings cracking, falling apart, and the very air distorting. The rift was still open, and the creatures were still open, and the creatures were still open. And the creatures were pouring out of it, each one more grotesque and powerful than the last. The figure from before the one that had taunted them emerged again from the shadows, its form more solid than ever. It towered over them, a monstrous presence that seemed to ordegamibji, a monstrous presence that seemed to feed on the darkness. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly fire as it reached out, its voice booming across the clearing. "You think you can stop me?" the figure said, its voice a deep, guttural growl that shook the ground beneath their feet. "You have only delayed the inevitable. This world belongs to me. You will never leave." The creatures continued to advance, pushing the group backs toward the now ruined altar. The pressure was mounting, and they were running out of space to maneuver. "We can't keep fighting like this," Narat shouted. His voice panicked as he swung his branch at one of the approaching creatures. "We're outnumbered. We don't need to fight them all," Mir said, his voice firm. "We just need to find the heart. The source of this curse is somewhere here, and we need to destroy it once and for all." The figure smirked, its eyes narrowing with cruel amusement. "You think you can destroy the source? There is no source. I am the source. I am the darkness. You are nothing." But as the figure spoke those words, the air around them seemed to shift once more. The ground trembled violently, and the entire landscape began to warp. The very way as he warped, the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, the world around them flickering like a broken film reel. The shadows around them grew darker, denser, as if pulling the world into itself. "It's starting to collapse," Aylin cried out, her voice filled with panic. "We're running out of time." Emir took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing mind. "We need to get to the center of this place. The rift is the heart of it all. It's feeding the curse. We need to destroy it." Zainab nodded, her eyes wide with determination. "Then, let's go. If we don't stop it now, we'll never get out of here." The group ran toward the center of the village, dodging the creatures that were now attacking with greater force. The rift pulsed with an unnatural energy, its power growing stronger with every step they took. The air around them felt like it was alive, pressing against them, suffocating them. As they reached the center, the altar, now a twisted monument of stone and energy, was the only thing that remained standing. The creatures had retreated for a moment, as if waiting for something. The ground beneath them continued to shake, but the altar's energy had become overwhelming. "This is it," Amir said, his voice filled with resolve. "This is where it all started, and this is where it will end." The figure from before appeared once more, stepping forward from the shadows, its eyes glowing with rage. "You cannot destroy what is already a part of you. The curse is eternal. It is in your blood. It is in your souls." But Emir didn't flinch. He stepped forward, reaching toward the altar, his hand glowing with the remnants of the energy they had used to seal the rift before. "Together," he said, turning to the others. "This is our last chance." The group gathered around him, each of them focusing their energy on the altar. As they did, the dark figure howled in fury, its form flickering and distorting as the power of the altar began to fight back. The very world around them began to tremble, the ground cracking as the forces of the rift tried to push them back. But they didn't stop with a final surge of energy. The altar's dark power exploded outward, sending a shockwave of energy rippling through the world around them. The figure screeched in agony, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The creatures that had attacked them dissolved into the air, their shadows fading away. The rift began to close, the dark energy being sucked back into the altar, and the very fabric of the cursed reality began to unravel. The sky above them shifted, the stars blinking out one by one, and the world seemed to collapse into itself. And then there was nothing, no rift, no creatures, no darkness, only lift, no creatures, no silence. The group stood there, breathless, their hearts still racing from the intensity of the battle. The world around them was still, peaceful. The air was calm, and the ground beneath them felt solid once more. Emir let out a long, exhausted breath. It's over. It's really over, Zainab, still holding onto his hand, nodded, her face filled with relief. We did it, Murat, his body covered in cuts and bruises, smiled faintly. We survived. Aylan let out a small laugh, though it was filled with disbelief. I can't believe we're still here. I thought we were done for. The group stood together, looking at the remnants of the world they had just saved. They had survived the curse, stopped the rift, and destroyed the source of the darkness. But in the back of their minds, they all knew something. This world, this reality, they had faced something far bigger than they could have imagined. And though they had won, the question lingered. What else was out there waiting? And with that, the curse was broken, the rift sealed, and the world saved for now. Would they face another challenge, or had they truly defeated the darkness? Only time would tell. The clearing was still, but the atmosphere was far from peaceful. The group had just defeated the rift and destroyed the curse's source, but something lingered in the air, an unsettled feeling that no one could shake. No one could shake, had fought, endured, and survived. But the cost had been high, and the darkness they had faced seemed to have left its mark on them. Emir stood at the edge of the clearing, looking around at the world they had just saved. The mist was gone, the trees stood motionless, and the sky above was clear. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, there was an overwhelming sense of emptiness, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something else. We did it, he whispered to himself, though he couldn't quite believe it. We really did it. Zainab approached him slowly, her footsteps light, almost as if she were afraid the ground might disappear beneath her feet. It feels wrong, doesn't it? She asked, her voice low, filled with unease. Emir turned to face her, his eyes weary but resolute. I know what you mean. It doesn't feel like we've won. We've closed the rift, but there's still something out there. Something bigger. Murat, who had been scanning the horizon, nodded in agreement. The rift might be closed, but this world, it's still fragile. What if something worse comes out next time? Aylan stepped forward, a faint smile on her lips despite the exhaustion that lined her face. We faced the worst of it, whatever comes next. We'll handle it together. But even as she spoke those words, there was a deep sense of uncertainty hanging in the air. They had destroyed the heart of the curse, sealed the rift, and pushed back the darkness. But now, they stood in a world that felt too quiet, too still. They had disrupted the natural order, and while they had won, the balance felt fragile, like the very ground beneath their feet might crack at any moment. I don't know, Emir said, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. It's not over. The curse might be broken, but there's still a darkness here. There's still a darkness here. Hasn't been dealt with. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled again, just like before, the vibrations sending a jolt through their bodies. The trees began to bend, their trunks warping in unnatural ways. The mist, which had once surrounded them, began to rise again from the ground, thick and suffocating. The group exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the same world they had left behind. It had changed, twisted by the curse. But what did it mean now? We need to move, Emir said quickly, his voice filled with urgency. We've sealed the rift, But the world is still unstable. Something's wrong. As they turned to leave, a low growl filled the air, like the sound of something massive, moving through the fog. The ground beneath them cracked open once more, wider this time, and from the depths of the earth emerged a new figure, dark, shifting, its form made of pure shadow. The creature, far larger than anything they had faced before, stepped into the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Unlike the previous manifestations of the curse, this one was not distorted. It was perfectly still, its form solid and terrifying. "This is not over," the figure said. "It is not over," the figure said, its voice resonating with ancient power. It seemed to speak from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have destroyed the heart of the curse, but you have only scratched the surface of the true source." Zainab's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "We destroyed the curse." The figure's form seemed to shift, growing larger with every word. "The curse you fought was only a shadow. The true curse is much older. It is not bound by your laws, your understanding of time. You cannot destroy what is eternal." Emir's eternal. Emir's mind raced. He had thought they were free. He had believed that they had ended it once and for all. But now, standing before this creature, he understood. This world, the curse, it was part of something greater, something far older than they had realized. "How do we stop it?" Emir demanded. "If it's eternal, how do we destroy something that has no end?" The creature chuckled, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves. "You cannot destroy it. You can only contain it. And that is what you must do. The rift may be sealed, but the balance has been broken. Now, you must restore it, or else everything you know will collapse." A sense of dread settled over them. The battle had never truly been about destroying a curse. It had been about containing something ancient and powerful that had been unleashed. "We're not finished," Emir said, quietly, his voice filled with a cold determination. "There's more to this. We have to stop it. We can't let it spread." The figure looked down at them, its eyes glowing brighter. "You can try, but remember this. The darkness you face is not a force. It is a part of the fabric of this world. To truly stop it, you must confront the true source of the curse, the place where all things begin." Suddenly, the world around them shifted again. The ground began to rumble, and the trees bent under an invisible weight. The very air around them felt heavier, as though it was alive and pushing against them. "Where is it?" Murat asked, his voice trembling. "Where is it to go?" The figure's form flickered, and the shadows that had once surrounded them seemed to reach out and curl around the group. "The heart of this world is deeper than you can imagine. It is not a place you can reach by force. It is something you must understand. Only then can you stop it." With those final words, the figure disappeared into the mist, its form vanishing as though it had never existed. The air became still once again, but the group knew that this was not the end. The true challenge still awaited them, hidden in the depths of the world they had just saved. "We need to find it," Emir said, his voice filled with certainty. "Whatever this place is, wherever it's hidden, we need to stop it before it consumes everything." The journey was far from over. The true source of the curse remained elusive, its darkness lingering, waiting to be confronted. Would they find the heart of the world and stop the curse for good, or would they be drawn into a never-ending cycle of destruction? The group stood in silence, the ominous presence of the creature still hanging in the air, its words echoing in their minds. The darkness they had faced was not over, and as the figure disappeared into the mist, the world around them seemed to pygmy. The Sensi hold its breath. They had thought the battle was over, but the real challenge had just begun. "We need to move," Emir said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The true source of the curse is still out there, and we need to find it before it's too late. The others nodded in agreement, though they were all aware of the danger they faced. The world around them seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive, watching them. They had been pulled into a twisted reality, and now they had to find a way to stop it for good. I don't even know where to begin, Zainab muttered, her voice tight. How are we supposed to stop something that is part of this world's very fabric? Emir turned to face her, his eyes filled with determination. We have to find the heart, the place where it all began. That's where we'll find the answers. Murat stepped forward, his brow furrowed in thought. We need to move fast. If that thing is right, the longer we wait, the stronger it becomes. Aylan glanced around nervously. What if we're too late? What if the curse is already beyond our control? Well, we can't think like that, Emir said firmly. We've faced worse. We can't let this world fall apart. They began to move, heading toward the village square where they had first arrived. The mist still lingered in the air, but it seemed less oppressive now. The trees around them stood tall and silent, their gnarled branches swaying gently in the wind. The path they took seemed to shift, as if the very landscape were changing, molding itself to trap them. This place is constantly changing, Zainab remarked, her eyes scanning the surroundings. It's like it's adapting to us. The more we fight, the more it fights back. We have to find the core, Emir said again, his gaze fixed on the village ahead. It's the only ledge ahead. It's the only way. As they reached the center of the village, they saw something that made their hearts sink, a dark, swirling mass in the air above the town square. The rift had reappeared, more unstable and violent than before. It seemed to be growing, pulling the very essence of the village into it. No! Murat shouted, stepping forward. It's happening again. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the rift pulsed with dark energy. The air was thick with power, the fabric of reality itself warping and shifting. The dark figure they had faced earlier appeared once more, this time more solid, terrifying than ever. You cannot stop this, the figure's voice boomed. The curse will never be destroyed. It is woven into the very core of this world. You cannot run from it. Emir squared his shoulders, his voice filled with defiance. We already defeated you once. We will do it again. The figure laughed, the sound hollow and cold. You think you can fight the darkness? You have only delayed the inevitable. This world belongs to me. I am the curse, and you are my servants. The group braced themselves, their eyes scanning the rift as it grew larger and more unstable. The creatures, twisted and grotesque, began to emerge from the rift once again, their glowing eyes fixed on the group. It seemed as if the world itself was coming apart, the very air around them pulsing with dark energy. We need to close it for good, Zainab said, her voice filled with urgency. We can't let it consume everything. Emir nodded. We have to find the heart, where it all started. It's the only way to stop this for good. The figure's laugh faded into a low growl, its eyes glowing brighter with malice. You will fail. You are nothing. With a roar, the figure lunged toward them, its form shifting and warping as it attacked. The creatures rushed forward, their bodies flickering and shifting like shadows. The group fought back with everything they had, each blow feeling like it might be their last. But even as they fought, the rift continued to expand, its dark energy consuming everything in its path. The world around them was falling apart, and the group knew they had to act fast if they wanted to save it. Emir's mind raced. He needed to find the source, They needed to close the rift for good, or all would be lost. The altar, the heart of the curse, was their only hope. Move, Emir shouted, charging toward the altar in the center of the square. The others followed, their movements desperate but determined. The ground beneath them shook violently, but they didn't stop. The creatures were closing in on them, but they didn't stop. Had no choice, they had to reach the altar, or it would all be over. When they reached the altar, they saw that it had changed. The runes that had once glowed with dark energy were now pulsing with a sickly light, and the altar itself seemed to slowly wave and offer at trying it high. And a mistake. Inuki, be alive. Its stone surface rippling like liquid. The rift was feeding off it, drawing power from the altar. This is it, Zainab said, her voice filled with awe and fear. The heart of it all. Emir took a deep breath, his hand shaking as he reached out toward the altar. We have to destroy it. He placed his hands on the altar, focusing all his energy into it. The power of the rift surged around him, pushing against him, but he held firm. He could feel the curse trying to resist, trying to pull him into its grasp, but he didn't let go. He couldn't. Together, he shouted to the others. The group gathered around the altar, their hands glowing with the remnants of the energy they had used to fight the curse. Together, they focused on the altar, pushing their energy into it. The runes on the altar began to glow brighter, and the rift began to falter, its pull weakening. The creature that had been haunting them screeched in fury, its form flickering wildly. The energy around them grew unbearable, but they pushed through it, channeling their power into the altar. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the rift collapsed. The world went still. The creatures disappeared. The curse was gone. The group stood in the aftermath, exhausted but alive. The village around them was silent, the air clear once more. The oppressive darkness had lifted, and the landscape was calm. But as they looked around, they knew one thing for certain. They had survived, but the scars of what they had faced would never fade. They had destroyed the heart of the curse, but the world had been forever changed. The world around them had quieted, but the weight of what they had just experienced still lingered in the air. The rift had collapsed, and the creatures were gone, but something was different. The earth beneath their feet no longer felt solid, it felt almost fragile, as though the world had been cracked and pieced together again. They stood there for a moment, in the stillness, catching their breath. Victory was theirs, but it didn't feel like the end. The world around them had been reshaped, and the echoes of the curse were still present, whispering in the back of their minds. We did it, Zainab said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. But is it really over? Emir turned slowly, his gaze scanning the horizon. The sky had returned to its normal color, the oppressive weight that had hung in the air now gone. But there was a lingering feeling in the pit of his stomach, like the world was holding its stomach, breath, waiting for something. I think so, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. But I don't know. It feels like we've changed the fabric of reality. There are still pieces of the curse we don't understand. The ground beneath their feet shook again, but this time, it wasn't the rift trying to tear the world apart. No, this felt different, like the earth itself was reacting to what had just happened. It was as if the curse had left scars in the world that would never heal. Is that normal? Aylin asked, her voice strained as she tried to steady herself against the shaking ground. Before anyone could respond, the mist from the rift began to rise again, swirling around them like a living thing. It was thinner this time, almost transparent, but still there, still watching them. And as it grew, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. No, Emir muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We're not done yet." The mist continued to rise, swirling and thickening as it gathered in the center of the clearing. Then, from within the fog, a figure began to emerge, a shape, blurry at first, but growing clearer as it stepped into view. It was the same figure that had appeared before, the one that had taunted before them in the heart of the curse. But this time, it was different. The figure's form was clearer, more solid, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. "You think you've won?" The figure's voice echoed, sounding like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "But the curse is not something you can destroy. It is part of you. It is part of this world, and you have only delayed the inevitable." The group tensed, stepping closer to one another. The mist had become thicker now. Surrounding them, closing in like a prison. "Why are you here?" Murat demanded, his voice shaking with both anger and fear. "We defeated you. We stopped the curse." The figure's form flickered, like a shadow moving in and out of existence. It wasn't solid, it was something more ancient, something that existed beyond the physical realm. "You didn't defeat me. You cannot defeat what is eternal. The curse lives on, in every corner of this world. It is in the fabric of reality itself. You cannot escape it." Emir clenched his fists, stepping forward, his face hard. "We will fight it. We'll stop it again." The figure's laugh was deep and hollow, like the sound of 1,000 whispers. "You can fight it all you want, but the curse will always find a way to return. It is woven into this world. There is no escaping it." The ground trembled once more, and the figure's form began to shift, becoming more solid with each passing second. Its eyes glowed brighter, the light burning with the power of the curse. No matter how many times you close the rift, it will always open again. The figure intoned, "And when it does, I will be there, waiting." The mist around them thickened, the shadows deepening. The group could feel the weight of its presence, like something was pressing against them from all sides. They could feel the darkness creeping closer, pulling them in. But even as the figure's form grew more solid, something else happened. The air around them began to crackle with energy, a surge of light emanating from the altar they had just destroyed. The very ground beneath them seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy, as if something ancient was awakening. Emir's heart raced. "This is it," he whispered, once and for all. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the remnants of the artifact they had used before, the one that had sealed the rift. It was still warm, its energy faint but present. If they could use it again, they might be able to force the curse back. Without hesitation, Emir held the artifact high, channeling all the energy they had left into it. The light from the artifact began to grow, illuminating the entire clearing. The mist began to dissipate, and the figure faltered, its form flickering in and out of existence as the energy surged around them. "No!" the figure screamed, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot stop it! The curse is eternal!" But the group didn't stop. They focused on the artifact, each of them channeling their energy into it, fighting back the darkness that had consumed their world. The energy from the artifact grew brighter, pushing against the figure's form, forcing it back. The ground beneath them shook violently as the figure writhed in agony. The air around them crackled with power, the rift pulsing with an unnatural energy. And then, with one final burst of light, the figure exploded into Then when one final burst of light, the figure exploded into nothingness, vanishing into the air like smoke. The mist dissipated, and the energy around them faded, leaving them standing in the clearing once again. For a long moment, there was silence. The oppressive weight had lifted, the world no longer trembling with dark energy. They had done it. They had stopped the curse again. But as the group stood in the quiet aftermath, they all knew one thing for sure. The curse may have been sealed for now, but the world would never be the same. They had changed it forever, and somewhere, deep down, they understood that they would always be tied to it. For the curse was not just an entity or a force, it was a part of the world itself, never truly end. The world was still, its air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The battle was over, but the silence felt unnatural, as if the land itself was recovering from the strain of the curse. The ground no longer shook. The oppressive darkness was gone, but something in the air still felt fragile. They had survived, but had they truly won? Emir stood in the middle of the clearing, his hands still trembling from the energy they had just channeled into the artifact. His breath was slow, but his mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. They had sealed the curse again, but the creature had warned them. The curse was eternal. He turned to the others. "Is it really over?" Zeynep, her face pale but determined, nodded slowly. "We've stopped it for now. The creature, it's gone." But even as she said the words, doubt lingered in her voice. The curse, the creature's warning, it haunted them all. "We need to be sure," Emir said quietly. "We can't just assume it's over." Aylin, standing next to him, let out a slow breath. "I don't know," feeling that something is still here, that we missed something. Murat looked out over the clearing, his eyes narrowing. "It doesn't feel right. But what do we do now? We fought this curse. But what's left? What happens next?" Emir glanced back at the place where the rift had once been, now just a fading scar on the land. He could feel the weight of their actions, the balance they had disrupted. The curse might be sealed for now, but there was no telling when it would return. "We rebuild," he said finally, his voice firm. "We've survived this. We've broken the curse, but we can't stop. We have to be ready for whatever comes next." But as the group began to turn away, ready to leave the clearing behind and move forward, the ground beneath their feet shifted once more. Not a tremor, not a small shake, but a deep, unsettling crack that split the earth open. Everyone froze. Emir's heart raced again, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of the knife he had carried. No, not again. The crack widened, and from it a black smoke began to seep up, rising like a mist, swirling in the air around them. It wasn't just the dark energy of the curse, it was new, fresh. This, it is impossible," Zeynep murmured, stepping back in fear. "We closed it. We sealed it. How is this happening?" The black smoke began to coalesce into a shape, a figure, not quite human, but not entirely something else. A shadowy form, barely visible, emerging from the crack in the earth, its body twisting and distorting in the haze. Emir's mind raced. "It's still here. It never left." The shadowy figure stepped forward, its form solidifying into something more tangible. Its eyes were glowing, a dark, menacing red, and its presence filled the air with an overwhelming sense of malice. "You should have known," the figure spoke, its voice deep and echoing, like 1,000 whispers layered over each other. "You cannot destroy me. You cannot destroy what has always been." The figure's form rippled, revealing jagged, twisted twisted shapes, as if the very essence of the curse had taken form before them. "You sealed one part of me, but I am not just a force or a curse," it hissed, its voice a low growl. "I am the world itself. You cannot fight what is born of reality." The group looked at one another, fear and determination in their eyes. They had thought the curse was over. They had sealed the rift, destroyed the heart of the darkness, but now they faced something far more terrifying, than they had ever imagined. "This is what I have been waiting for," the figure continued, its voice now a chilling whisper. "You have done the work for me. You've weakened the bonds of reality, and now I can reshape this world. You cannot stop me. I will remake everything, just as it was always meant to be." Amir's pulse quickened. "You're not the curse. You're something else. What are you?" The figure paused, its eyes narrowing. "I am the origin, the beginning. The darkness you fought was just a fraction of my power. I am what has always been, hidden in the depths of this world. You cannot escape me." The air around them grew heavier, and the ground beneath them began to crack open even wider. The figure's form grew larger, towering over them, a living shadow made of the very essence of darkness and destruction. "We have to stop it," Zainab said, her voice filled. Her voice filled with fear, but also a resolve they had never seen in her before. "We can't let it reshape this world." Emir looked at the others, his mind racing for a solution. The curse wasn't just an external force. It was something deeply ingrained in the very fabric of the world. What they had sealed was only a piece of the whole. He turned to the group, his voice steady. "We can't fight it with force. We have to destroy it at its core, at the root of this world. That's the only way." "Where?" Aylan asked, her voice filled with dread. "Where do we go?" Emir pointed toward the dark, ever-expanding crack in the earth. "There. It's tied to the very foundation of this world. We need to go down to the center." They had no time to waste. The figure knew. The entity that stood before them was not just a curse. It was something much older, much more powerful, and the world was starting to unravel under its presence. The group had no choice. They had to face the true heart of the curse and confront the entity that had risen from their depths. The fate of everything depended on their ability to stop it before the world collapsed completely. The entity before them grew larger, its shadow stretching and consuming the ground beneath their feet. The crack in the earth continued to widen, and the oppressive energy was becoming almost unbearable. The figure's eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and the whispers in the air grew louder, echoing in their minds. "We can't let this happen," Amir said, his voice sharp and filled with determination. "We've already destroyed the curse once. This is just another part of it. We have to stop it here." Zainab nodded, her hand trembling, but her resolve strong. "How do we stop something like this? It's not just a curse anymore. It's part of this world's foundation." Emir turned to her, his gaze steady. "We destroy its core. The entity is tied to the world itself. If we find its origin and destroy it, the entity won't be able to exist." Murat, who had been studying the expanding crack, pointed at the center of the rift. "There, that's where the heart of it is. We need to go there, now." The group nodded, ready to move. The ground shook again, and the entity began to shift, its form becoming even more monstrous. The air around them was filled with a dense, suffocating energy that made it difficult to breathe. As they made their way toward the rift, the entity's voice echoed once more, now deeper, menacing. "You cannot stop me. This world is mine. You are nothing but insects crawling on its surface, and I will remake it as I see fit." Aylan's voice was filled with defiance. "You may think this world is yours, but we'll never let you take it." The entity's eyes narrowed, glowing even brighter. "You think you can defeat me? I have existed before time itself. Your efforts are futile." But the group pressed on, ignoring the growing weight of the energy around them. The closer they got to the rift, the stronger the pull became. They could feel the air warping. The world around them trembling as the rift's energy threatened to consume everything. "This is it," Emir said, his voice strained as they reached the edge of the crack. "We have to go down." The rift continued to widen, its dark energy swirling around them like a storm. The group had no choice but to descend into the depths. They braced themselves as the ground beneath them cracked open further, revealing a dark abyss below. "Stay close," Emir warned. "We need to get to the heart of Aridenzio it before the rift consumes everything." With no other option, the group climbed down into the abyss, the darkness swallowing them whole. The world above them was fading, replaced by a deep, unnatural blackness. The only sound was the distant dull blackness hum of the rift, the entity's presence still looming over them. As they descended further, the temperature dropped, and the air became thick with the oppressive energy of the rift. The walls of the abyss seemed to pulse with dark light, the shadows shifting as if alive. The deeper they went, the more they felt the weight of the curse bearing down on them. "We're close," Zeynep said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it," Emir nodded, his eyes scanning the dark surroundings. "We need to find the core. The entity's power is tied to this place. If we destroy it, we destroy the curse." Finally, they reached the bottom, where the true heart of the rift was revealed. It wasn't a solid object, it was an entire dimension, a swirling mass of energy that seemed to exist outside of time and space. The very air around it shimmered with raw power, the darkness pulsing and contracting like a living thing. "This is it," Murat said, his voice filled with awe and fear. "This is the source of everything." The entity's voice boomed in the air, now echoing through the very fabric of reality. "You are too late. This is the heart of all things. You cannot destroy it. You cannot stop what was always meant to be." But the group didn't hesitate. They had come too far to back down now. They had faced unimaginable horrors, and they had won before. They could do it again. Emir stepped forward, his voice strong. "We're not giving up. Shh, we've already destroyed the curse once, and we will destroy it again." The group focused their energy, channeling all their strength into the heart of the rift. As they did, the dark energy around them began to swirl, pushing back against them, fighting to stop them. "We have to concentrate," Zeynep shouted. "This is the final step." With a final burst of power, the group channeled everything they had into the rift, the heart of the curse itself. The dark energy screamed as it fought back, but the group didn't waver. They had one last chance to destroy it, to end it once and for all. The rift shuddered, the ground beneath them cracking as the heart of the curse began to break apart. The darkness that had filled the air seemed to dissolve, the energy dissipating as the rift closed. For a moment, everything was still. The world was silent, and then the rift collapsed, the final remnants of the curse vanishing into the nothingness from which they had emerged. The group stood in the aftermath, exhausted but alive. The air around them was calm. The weight of the darkness lifting from their shoulders. The curse was gone, but even as they stood there, looking around at the peaceful landscape before them, a question lingered in their minds. Was it really over? The world had been changed by the curse. It had been tested. But now, it was quiet for now. The balance had been restored. They had survived, and in doing so had broken the cycle. But deep down, they all knew. Darkness always finds a way to return. Would they be ready for whatever came next? Only time would tell. The aftermath of their battle still weighed heavily on them. Though the curse had been sealed and the rift closed for good, the world around them felt different, quiet, peaceful even. But it was the kind of peaceful even. But it was the kind of peace that only came after something dark had passed through. The scars of what they had faced would not fade easily. The group stood in the now calm clearing, looking out at the landscape. The mist was gone, replaced by a crisp, clear sky. The trees, once gnarled and twisted by the curse, were standing straight and tall, their branches reaching toward the heavens. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything, as though the world was breathing again. "We did it," Eileen again said. Breaking the silence, her voice was quiet, but there was a trace of relief in it. Murat gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, but we've earned a long rest after all this." Zeynep looked around, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It feels strange, like everything's too calm now." Emir nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "It's not wrong, it's just different. We've lived through the darkest of it, but the world will never be the same. And neither will we." There was a weight in his voice, a truth that none of them could deny. They had faced something beyond their comprehension, something that would have broken lesser people, but they had survived, and that made them stronger. And yet, despite their errand, and yet, despite their victory, the question lingered. "What now? We can't forget what we've learned," Zeynep said softly. "This world isn't what it seems. There's still so much we don't understand." Emir turned to face her. "And we won't forget. But we've done what we came here to do. We closed the rift. But we've done what we came here to do. We closed the rift. We stopped the curse for now. That's enough." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with the sounds of the world slowly returning to normal. The wind rustled the leaves above them, birds sang in the distance, and somewhere far off, a river flowed peacefully. But even in the stillness, they could feel the lingering presence of everything they had faced. "We should head back," Eileen said after a while, her voice quiet but determined. "The world is waiting for us. We've done our part. Now it's time to rebuild." They all nodded, understanding what she meant. They couldn't linger here, in the place where it all started. They had survived, but there was life to live, and the world outside was waiting for them to return to it. As they began to walk, slowly leaving the clearing behind, the tension in the air seemed to loosen. Just a little. The weight of the curse that had haunted them for so long was finally lifting. The path before them was still and was still and was still unknown. And though there were still mysteries to uncover, there was one thing they knew for certain. They had faced the darkest parts of this world and emerged stronger. The journey wasn't over. It never truly ended, but they had crossed over through the fire and come out the other side. They were no longer just survivors. They were the ones who would stand guard over this world, ensuring that it never fell into darkness again. And as they walked away from the clearing, the wind a-tweering, the wind a-tipping their backs, they couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in a long while, the world was finally at peace. The group walked together, each step feeling lighter than the last. The weight of the battle, the darkness, the curse, all of it was beginning to fade. But even in this calm, a part of them knew that they had just lived through something that could never be undone. The echoes of the curse would remain, buried deep within the very fabric of their memories. As they walked through the village, the streets no longer felt empty or haunted. They were familiar again, the once twisted paths now lined with the warmth of a world that had begun to heal. Yet, every so often, one of them would glance over their shoulder. One of them would glance over their shoulder, a reminder that the darkness had been real, and it could return. "We've seen the worst of it," Zeynep said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "But we're not the same people we were before. This world, this reality, it's changed us." Emir stopped, his gaze sweeping over the village they had saved. "It's true," he said softly. We've changed. But maybe that's the only way to grow. Maybe that's how we survive. Murat smiled faintly, adjusting his pack as they continued to walk. Survive? Yes. But I think we've earned a little peace. Let's not forget that we've also earned a future. Eileen walked beside them, her eyes glinting with a quiet resolve. We've earned more than just survival. We've earned the right to live again. And as they made their way out of the village, they realized that the world was waiting for them to rebuild, to live, to carry the lessons they had learned. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting its golden light over in the sky, the horizon. The road ahead stretched out, uncertain but filled with possibility. They had all come from different places, different backgrounds, but now they shared something far deeper, an unbreakable bond formed through fire, darkness, and survival. They knew they would never forget what they had faced. The curse would always be with them, a shadow that lingered just beneath the surface, but it would no longer have power over them. They had taken control of their own destiny. We can do this, Zainab said, her voice filled with quiet strength. Emir nodded, turning to the others. We faced the unimaginable, and we came through it. Now we move forward, together. With that, they stepped into the future, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. And so, the world began to heal. The journey was complete. The curse had been vanquished, the rift sealed, and the group's bond solidified by the trials they had faced. But in the back of their minds, they knew that every ending led to a new beginning. The world was no longer the same, and neither were they. The future was theirs to shape.